Hello again, it's Phil Croshaw here from Passions. And in this episode, we're going to be talking to Peter Secchi. And Peter is very heavily involved in sponsorship, particularly in motorsport, but he has a passion for sport and cooking. And we're going to find out what it's all about in this interview. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to another edition of Passions. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Secchi. And Peter's going to be talking to me today about his passions. Now, I would imagine, having had a conversation with him very briefly before we came on air, that one of his passions just might be football based on last night's result. So we'll have a chat about that, obviously, because we're recording this just after the semi-final result that England had last night. And there's a twist to that, but I'll let Peter tell us about that. So welcome, Peter, to Passions. Tell us who you are and what your passion is.
Phil, thanks very much. Great to talk to you. Where do you start with passions? It's such a lovely topic, and I'd like to think it takes up more of our life than we care to admit. But I would say if you had to split mine up, it's going to be sport. And by that, I mean pretty much anything sporty, although racing cars seems to take up most of that time. And then conversely, cooking. I'm a real foodie. I mean, that's a real soft spot for me. So if you could find somewhere in between racing cars and food, then that's where you'll find me.
Well, that's fantastic. And actually, I'll tell you what, take a look at the Passions channel videos, of which there's now probably about 60 and going northwards to 100 at very, very fast rate. Because there is an interview on there actually with Mike Tompkins, who was the MasterChef finalist. So there's something for everybody on Passions. And there's lots of motorsport stuff as well. So start off then by, let's just have a quick chat about the football, which was last night. It was obviously an amazing game, very emotional for the country. Well, certainly for the English bit of the country. How did you find it? What did you think? And I'm going to ask you this straight question because I know probably what your answer is going to be. Who are you supporting then on Sunday?
Sunday's the worst of all possible worlds because I grew up pretty much supporting the Azzurri and the Blues, and now they're facing England. I suppose most of my childhood, I've been safe in the knowledge it was unlikely England would get anywhere near a final, I suppose. And now you've got both coming up against each other. So I'm not sure. I hated Tuesday's game. Italy-Spain was a horrific experience for me, minute by minute, teeth gnashing, jumping up and down. But I loved the England game because I could take a slight step back. I thought they were amazing. And I'm going to have to make up my mind on Sunday.
Yeah, okay. I thought I'd put you on the spot, but it's a tricky one, actually, to be fair, for you. I can imagine.
Hey, do you know what? I think if you find anybody who's got sort of, a bit of immigrant blood, they'll be telling you very similar stories, right? It's not clear cut by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's made harder this time because England are playing such amazing football and they're such a likeable squad. Southgate's put together an amazing group of players who are, I suppose, topically for this, really living what everybody wants to see their England players be. So it's very hard not to get swept along by that. If you can see those England players celebrating that winner last night and not be moved, then you're probably watching the wrong channel.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, as everybody's said 1,000 times, on the back of what we've been going through over the last 18 months, which frankly, the most amazing science fiction writer could not have written, I don't think. It has even more of a meaning and even more momentum.
100%. And, if you look at the empty stadia we've seen, I think that's quite an interesting topic. It shouldn't make any difference, right? It's 11 guys playing 11 guys. You could do it in the park, you could do it in an empty stadium. But those who've been lucky enough to play with thousands of people watching will not only say that it heightens their experience as athletes, but of course, everything is increased because you just have this phenomenal sort of sink or a soak of everybody's passion just flowing from the stands to the players. And you can't measure that. I mean, measurement in our sponsorship game is probably one of the darkest arts. But you have to accept that we're dealing with a very, very mercurial concept of people just celebrating and emotion and passion running through every single moment of that spectacle. And that's why we get involved, right? As from athletes right through to fans. It's just that magical moment.
It is, and obviously the magic of passion. So talk to me about your work then. You intimated there briefly about sponsorship. Tell me about what your business does.
So we have a sponsorship company called Crunch Communications, and working almost exclusively now in motorsport, primarily in Formula One. We work with brands who are looking to activate their sponsorships. That's a tricky phrase because I don't think that means an awful lot to a lot of people. But if I give you a broad example, most stickers, if we talk in real base terms, sticker you see on the side of a racing car is doing a job, right? The brand wants you to see them. They want you to buy their product. They want you to believe in them. They want you to know more about them. It ranges. But effectively, the sticker you see on the side of a car is doing a job, and it's trying to tell you a story. Now, how you tell that story is where we come in. So we'll find clients who are bringing their guests to a race. So in a B2B level, they'll be hosting a whole variety of customers looking to do business at the race. I mean, what an experience, right? You are, as a customer or a prospective customer, invited to see their product in action in probably the fastest, most dynamic sport in the world. Pretty cool. So we do that. You might do that virtually. You might do that through social media. So we'll have clients for whom we make content or for whom we run social programs. You may want to communicate through the media. So there's an awful lot of PR and media relations that goes on, and so on and so on. So it's taken us down some phenomenally interesting paths, but it all comes back to that idea of taking the sport, the platform, and telling a story from it.
Brilliant. Okay. So how has it changed? How has sponsorship changed over the years? I mean, obviously I remember the times when Formula One used to have cigarette branding all over them. I think Marlboro, wasn't it? Exactly. And all that kind of thing, which of course has changed massively. Are clients focused on getting clear ROI as opposed to it just being something that you do and hope for the best? Or is that an assumption?
I think that's a correct assumption for some clients, whereas others are still very happy with, let's say, a more traditional model. The biggest change has probably happened outside of sport and sponsorship. So maybe I can answer your question in two halves. I think the traditional sponsorship model was born in a world where primarily sport, but sport was, we refer to it as the color in our week. So let's make some really rash assumptions here and be a little bit cliched. But we'll take a 5 or 6 day working week where people don't have a huge amount of TV at home. So we'll talk, 50s in Europe, for example, 50s, 60s, no TV at home, couple of radio stations. You can imagine it in a black and white world. That's how we talk about it. It's terribly patronizing, but I think for the sake of illustration, go with me. The reason I say that is because the opportunity to engage in sport was the color of your week. It was when your life burst into action. So if you could physically go and see your local football club, as a typical, let's say, a bloke, you're with your mates, you have a drink, you jump up and down, you sing, you shout, you see people who are doing things that you can only dream of. They're fitter than you, they're faster than you, they're richer than you. Everything about that sporting experience, and that's the when Saturday comes moment, 3 o'clock on a Saturday. It's your color, your world just explodes. And that probably encapsulates why sponsorship found its place there. Sponsorship was a chance for brands to associate with the most exciting part of somebody's life. I don't think there's too far of a jump to make that into when people went to the cinema. It was the age-old, we go to the cinema once a week because you know what? You can just sit down for a couple of weeks and just live through somebody else's eyes. So sport had a really important role, particularly in post-war Europe. And brands very quickly cottoned on to just by associating yourself with that coolness, you were parasitically living off it. So I like him because he smokes those cigarettes. That worked bloody well, right? I like her because she drinks that wine. Where that lived, and the examples you gave were, I think, at the tail end of that, associating brands with sport. Because think of the classic football shirts. right? Crown Paints, XYZ. We've all got those. And it's funny, isn't it? Because they're all really cast in the 80s, late 80s and 90s. What's happened is the world has expanded. We see color everywhere. We're living in a beautiful period, and we're so fortunate. So our stimulus now comes to us every few minutes through, you know, the mobile phone. You get on a bus, you go in a supermarket. It's impossible to escape that brand noise. And the challenge to sponsorship has been that it's not been devalued, but it's been joined by the most incredibly diverse competitors. So I could sponsor a computer game now, or I could sponsor Harry Potter World. And so as a brand, I don't necessarily have that easy path to being part of people's, you know, everyday life, because people are getting their kicks all over the place.
I suppose it's a bit like advertising, isn't it? In a sense that back in the day, when you need to advertise, and you'd advertise on pretty much, in simple terms, probably a billboard, radio, local paper, and national paper, TV maybe. But now there's the proliferation of all the different options and choices that there are. And I guess, is it fair to say that brands are also faced with, you know, the noise must be deafening in terms of the choices and options, and quite baffling, I would imagine.
I think it depends probably which foot you step on when you walk out of the door. It's either an amazing opportunity or it's quite daunting. And again, I'd like to think that's the role of people like us who can come in and guide. But it's certainly confusing, and changing is the key word, right? It's incredibly transient. The last 4 or 5 years have really, really turned the washing machine around faster and faster. But huge amounts of opportunity, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely amazing. How's the pandemic impacted then your sector?
The first impact has been brutal, because the vast majority of the activation is physical. And as I said earlier, that if you think of some classic examples of hosting, hospitality, it's a hugely premium, high valued part of most sponsorship packages. Visit a match, visit a race, meet a driver, meet a player. That's dead in the water. We're approaching the British Grand Prix next week, and you're seeing the green shoots of physical activation coming through. It's getting better. And I think the easing of restrictions has become quite disparate. So we're looking in an international context at a really mixed picture. We know that in the UK will be okay. We go to Hungary, which will be super open, no masks, no nothing. So getting better, but slow. What's been more interesting is how people have responded. And I've been really interested to see how different brands and different stakeholders have responded.
Yeah, so give me some examples then of that, where, if you can, where a particular brand might have responded in a different way.
I think the first comment we made was how the speed of response. The speed of response was incredibly varied, and if I was to be super broad, I'd say the most successful stakeholders responded very quickly. It's no coincidence that the cars or the teams with the most amount of partners were quick. They were quick to communicate with their stakeholders, and they were quick to find what they quite rightly billed as temporary fixes. So you can't come to a match, but don't worry, we're going to virtually host you. Or, you know why we can't have you in the garage, but join our webinar and we will take you inside the garage for some exclusive content to meet the drivers. That was pretty interesting, because the longer people took and the more they dithered, the less value their digital offering had.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I guess you've got to be quick, haven't you? You've got to be there, because I guess it's like, I suppose there's many examples, I guess, but one example that springs to mind from my point of view is the way that podcasting has exploded. I mean, I've been involved in and doing podcasting for years. I think 2004 was the first one I ever did, which is ridiculous. And of course, I don't even think the word was invented then. It was just doing interviews and putting them on the internet and all that kind of thing. But now, of course, all of a sudden, it's almost, if you haven't got a podcast, where have you been? That's the way I perceive it.
But I'd like to think you can trade off the fact that you were early into the game. You're therefore further down the road. You're better at what you do. You understand the environment better. So speed of response was the first thing. And I mean, it almost feels a lifetime ago, doesn't it? But if we go back to, second quarter of 2020, nobody knew which way was up. In the world, it's just absolutely era defining. So there was a fair amount of goodwill from everybody because we were all worried for our friends and our families, before we worried about our work. How that then transitioned into slightly more longer term or more credible solutions, I think that's where the industry really struggled. And I don't say that with any glee. It is super, super difficult for an industry which trades off a physical moment, as we said, the thrill of being at the game or the race. It is super difficult to replicate that in any way. And I thought so the immediate transition to digitize that was well received and pretty sensible. Some of the more creative solutions I thought were led by people who almost went back to basics. So last year we started a new project last year, which was a real reset project. So for brands, for teams in this case, who had partners they need to satisfy, they ran their digital hospitality experience. But do you know what the best ones did? The best ones would send a box to the house of the stakeholders with all of the cool stuff in it they would have got at the race. And it was interesting depending on how clients responded, but some would send like a luxury hamper, others would just send a scarf and a hat. But it was the reason I was more interested in it is we were super quick out of the box doing it, pardon the pun. And
yeah, I thought that.
The clients who responded really quickly to us got the benefit because, of course, now it's not, maybe it's just my search history researching it. Everyone's selling boxes, right? It's the stay-at-home pack, it's Father's Day gift box, Valentine's Day gift box, fine. It's not rocket science, right? But the feedback from the people who did that first was incredibly positive because suddenly you felt like somebody had reached out. And the point I guess I want to make is you don't have to be, it's not rocket science. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is a box, for goodness sakes. It's a box and a stamp. But you sometimes need somebody to stop what you're doing, tell you to relax and just go back to your human nature. It's really lovely to receive something when you're struggling, when everything's up in the air that shows, you know what, I'm really sorry you can't come to this event, but here's something to show we're thinking of you. That was an amazing project last year and really successful. And
in terms of expectations then, are clients looking for unicorns, or are they I'm trying to find the right words, are they realistic? Or is it what I call, in my game, I'm a business consultant, and I usually start off the conversation with, if you're looking for magic pixie dust, there's a good chance we might not find any, but are they looking for magic pixie dust when they come to you?
No, I've been very pleasantly surprised with the fraternal nature that the industry's responded with. Actually, most people are incredibly understanding of the fact we're all in the same boat. Now, that could be because of the global nature of F1, for example. It's interesting when we talk to our clients in different territories will have very different responses. Some people are still locked down. Some people we talk to are still brutally locked down at home, whereas we're talking in the UK where we're staring down the barrel of hopefully a pretty chilled summer. But what matches everybody together is a pretty good understanding that we are all in the same boat. The bigger pressure on clients is the budget cycle, and I'm increasingly nervous now as we go into the second half of the year. A client that's managed to hold on to their H2 budget has already done well, to be honest, because I can quite rightly understand the pressure of a financial director repurposing that budget, right? Most companies companies in the world are squeaking, right? There's no two ways about it. With the obvious exceptions, everybody is feeling the burn. So clients who've held on to their H2 budget are thinning, but I think we're starting to see pressure on Q1, Q2 next year already. So we would be into the planning cycle now for next season, and with reason. There is no calendar, there is no plan, there's no opportunity to fly around the world, there is no confidence, and that hasn't really made its pressure felt yet. But that we're not too far off. I think when we come back out of the summer, clients will really start to feel that burn to plan, and it's super difficult.
Yeah, well, I'm a Formula One fan myself. In fact, as a result of starting this show with Spencer Phillips, Spencer's got me now into Formula E, and I've just been interviewing somebody this morning, Extreme E. So yeah, motorsport's taken over my life, to be perfectly honest, which much to the horror of my wife, of course. Yeah, so and I know with Formula One that they keep talking about the different races, and they're going to cancel, postpone one and put another one on, and it just seems to be all over the place. Where do you have a natural passion for motorsport? I know you obviously said you have a passion for sport, but is motorsport something that's particularly strong in that passion arena?
It is, I'm afraid. I mean, I'm blighted with a couple of major issues personally, which this might not be a therapy session, but you know, while you're listening, of being horrifically competitive and rubbish at most sports, which is a terrible curse. And I really I love connecting with professional sport. I think to see any professional sport live is usually hugely overwhelming. It's very difficult to see any professional sportsman or woman ply their trade and not think, wow. So I'm a bit of a sucker for any professional sport. However, yes, motorsport is unquestionably the jewel in the crown for me, and it has been since I was a little boy. So I'm very lucky to work in a sport I unashamedly will say I adore. I think you can be encouraged to keep your light under a bushel, but you know what? I love it. It's a wonderful, wonderful world of racing cars and people who like racing cars, which ticks a couple of boxes for me.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, a lot of people talk about when they do these interviews about luck and all this kind of thing. But I tend to challenge everybody when they talk about luck, because I think it's about decision making, isn't it? And driving yourself to where you want to be, and not just letting the wind pick you up and throw you around and drop you somewhere. You know, I'm sure you've made numerous decisions and strategic perspectives on it in order to get to where you've got to and doing what you're doing.
I think there's a breaking point between having a sort of a chink of light in the window and then, you know, just diving for it. And once you're in, then you've almost in something which is as niche as sports. And I'm sure when you talk to people in the music industry or any of these sort of, I'd say, highly sought after industries, then there is an element of just, if any opportunity comes on, you just go for it. Because, you know, if we post a role or something and we advertise for a position, we'll have a queue of people 1 million miles long, which is wonderful and gives you an idea of how key people are to work in sport. But once you're in, I think there's an element of just being good at what you do. And we would encourage anybody to do that. It's not about knowing who won the 1957 French Grand Prix. I don't care. Well, I do, but not many people care. What I really care about is, how are you going to look after our clients? How are you going to communicate their message with a passion to their customers? That's our job. Our clients invest a huge amount of brand equity in us when we carry them on our shoulders into a race. And if you can't do that, if you don't have a feeling for why motorsport makes people tick and why the client wants us to communicate, then you'll struggle. And you only do that by just being good at who you are.
So is it fair to say then that brands are big fans, if you pardon the expression, of the changes in motorsport? You know, there's big changes, isn't there, for next year, for example?
That's right.
Are the brands very supportive of that, based on the dangers of people being, shall we say, bored of the following each other around the track scenario, which we're all familiar with?
Yeah, it's a common criticism of F1, and I would share that too. The reason we know this to be true is we've just conducted a survey this year, our first F1 Insider survey. There's quite a few fan surveys knocking around, but as far as we believe, it's the first time anyone's asked the industry, so that's brands, teams, and media, their opinion. And it's pretty clear that what everybody wants to see, professionally and personally, is better track action and a clearer message. They're the two things. And I think F1's doing a terrific job on both of them, right? We're a terribly impatient species, aren't we, as humans?
Yeah.
But it's just loud and clear. We need more ding-dong battles and better overtaking, and a better communication of how to grasp the nettle, how we are not an evil carbon burning, industry. There's a huge amount of strong sustainability messaging in F1, which some people tell better than others. But there's certainly a feeling from within the sport we need to be prouder about it and tell our story better. They're the two things that come through.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense to me. So what do you, I mean, gosh, I know you're not Nostradamus, but what's your feeling about where it might go then? Obviously the F1 is pretty very well established. You've got Extreme E and Formula E, as we said earlier, coming around the corner, and that's starting to build momentum.
Yeah.
Have you got a feel for where you think the future is of Formula One, and in particular its relationship to sponsorship and advertising?
The feeling, again, if I refer back to that survey, is overwhelmingly positive. Formula One's in super safe hands. There's some excellent leaders at the head of the sport, and I think they've managed to bring the teams into a really good place of understanding. So there's a period of experimentation. There's a period of trial and error to find a better product. So, of course, I have no idea what's going to happen actually next week, given let alone next year. But you must. But I would encourage everybody to consider Formula one of the most sort of open playgrounds in the world at the moment, and that's certainly borne out by the positivity and the amount of deals that are being done. The engagement is higher and higher every year. They're pushing into some interesting territories. How that applies itself on the ground next year, very different looking cars, which I think could help, certainly freshen the place up. And in 2025, new engines. There aren't that many people who care about the detail of the engine. F1's biggest problem at the moment is dancing this fine line between sport and entertainment. Which is it? Sport can be very purist. Entertainment can be, leaping around in all sorts of costumes. So there's a bit of way to go, but I feel like there is more positivity about the sport than there has been for a long time because of this willingness to communicate. F1's much more positive about its commitment to change its sustainability position, about its commitment to travel around the world. It's making all of the right noises and is starting to deliver. That needs to continue. But I think it will. And when that happens, it will inevitably bring more people in.
I mean, my perception is that certainly the drivers have a little bit of difficulties at times when they're being under pressure. Sometimes wonder whether they even themselves ask themselves, well, am I an entertainer or am I a sportsman? And you kind of, I suppose the answer is you're both. But if you look at Raikkonen and the way he's struggled with the press and the media and everything else, it's probably a good example of, I think he sees himself as a sportsman as opposed to an entertainer, doesn't he?
He does. I mean, he's incredibly unique, to put it mildly. I think I saw in the last Grand Prix, despite plodding around outside of the points, he was still the second most highly rated driver of the weekend. He's got an enormous fan base. But the drivers, again, incredibly young bunch, very savvy, very smart. And I don't mean trained to the point of being, blank faces. I mean, super cute as to what to do to make their careers progress. But, for these boys, we might accuse them occasionally of being a bit dry or a bit too lively or whatever it is. But when all is said and done, they're a bunch of incredibly brave lads who turn left and right and press two pedals in the right order better than anybody else.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. And I totally get where you're coming from on that. So you mentioned also quite an when I said to you, what other passions have you got? You answered it with quite interestingly by saying cooking was another. So that was quite a different eclectic mix. So tell me about your passion for cooking then, Peter, how that came about.
Well, perhaps it goes back to the Italian blood, the old stereotype. Yeah. Being in the kitchen, pulling an apron string. So there could be a lot of that. I certainly grew up in an incredibly foodie house. My maternal grandfather, for example, was a restaurateur, had a couple of restaurants in the West End and a bar, 24-hour cafe in Coventry Street, which in my university years, I would have given anything to him still to have, but probably for the better that he didn't.
Yeah.
But actually, I've got a group of pals, and we all cook together pretty often, actually. And as we've sort of grown up together, got married and had kids, now our wives are all friends. So it's more social than it is cooking. I'm not really one for taking an enormous plate and smearing it with the back of a spoon and scattering small flowers onto it. That's not our style. I see food very much as a conduit to good company and relaxation. I think the word company, I believe, is compane, is derivative of the Italian, which means with bread, right? There's something about sitting opposite somebody and breaking bread which just gets you away from the day. So maybe I overdo it a bit, but I would certainly say decompressing with some mates and with the kids, just cooking is just an exceptionally good way of chilling out.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and particularly again with the last 18 months, these simple things that we did without even thinking about it, we've not been able to do for so long, and all of a sudden, it seems like such a big deal to be able to just do something as simple as you've just described. That's
right, and I think there's a human element of us which we can forget too easily. But to be invited to have dinner with somebody is essentially a really human moment, right? It's a very cool way of just getting to know somebody, and that's what I mean about not when I say I love food. I couldn't tell you any of the swanky restaurants in the West End because I haven't been to any of them, and I'm not particularly interested in going to them. That it's not food for the sake of tasting something and saying, well, this is marvelous. It's more food for the chance to relax. It's a wonderful way just to try and stop the world for a few seconds before you have to get back on.
Do you think is it in any way also a way of you tapping into your creative streak? Do you think there's any of that at all with you as an individual?
Sorry, go.
No, I was just going to say, it's just a curious, intriguing as to whether, because I know that from a creative point of view, I can't draw my breath, as my dad used to say. Absolutely hopeless. Can't paint anything, can't sculpture anything, don't appreciate art, the whole 9 yards. But when it comes to business and business ideas and creativity in that, and then video and podcast production and planning, then I'm pretty good and I'm quite creative. And I'm just wondering whether that's my outlet, I suppose, with my creativity. Do you have a similar outlet of creativity with your food?
It's funny, the mates I referred to earlier on started a competition which I joined. So every week they would get together and draw out of a bowl the meal for the next week. But the deal was you would put in yours, they would put in theirs, and see how aggressive you wanted to get, right? So if you're talking a bit creativity, when one of your mates has stitched you up and you have to cook haggis from scratch, you're just wishing the day that you just had to make a loaf of bread or something. Yeah. It does take you into some amazing places. There's one of the main things which has been delayed on this front was the tallest burger competition, for example, which has now been on hold since last March until we can all get together. And there's a lot of talk about structurally engineering burger buns and so on. We've ended up doing some pretty cool stuff.
So it's not just football that's coming home; it's burgers that's coming home for you guys.
The burger competition is getting really aggressive. I'll be honest with you. We've had to write technical directives and make sure that there's no funny business because it's getting really quite nasty.
Oh yes, I can imagine. I can well imagine. Okay, well, finally, then, I just wanted to ask you about the psychology side of what you do, actually, because it's very interesting. I'm involved in marketing myself in my business. I do consultancy and coaching and things like that around marketing, with particular reference now to content marketing, of course, digital media-based marketing. I guess marketing's always been, and promotion and sponsorship's always been about psychology, but has it got even more about psychology now? Do you have to understand all the deeper emotional drivers of your clients and their clients?
So one of the biggest mistakes we can make in the sponsorship industry is forgetting that the people in the mix are exactly that. Okay, we are dealing with human beings, and the very nature of that emotional connection. We talked about the football earlier. I think it's very difficult to explain to an alien who's just landed on this planet why it's a good idea to go to Wembley last night, pay a fair amount of money to watch 11 guys do something you can do for free. Okay, if that doesn't make you understand why sport is odd and deeply embedded in people's brains, then nothing will. Right? You and I can go and kick a ball around now for free, but I dread to think what tickets are changing hands for on Sunday.
Yeah.
if we forget that, then we miss the first step, right? And you just stumble for the rest of your journey. The only caveat I would add to that is we have a responsibility to our clients to understand their business. And the first question, before we worry about people's psychology and their emotional connection with the sport, the primary responsibility we have to clients is to drive their business. And that's a cold decision. What are you trying to sell? How many of them? Where do you want to sell them? To whom do you want to sell them? Because if we miss that, then you start doing broad brush sponsorship stuff, which never really delivers. So psychology is super important. It's on the podium. Let's do some silly motorsport analogy. I think before you consider that, we still have to make sure we are finely tuned into the client's business objectives. Otherwise, we're going to connect with sports fans as sports fans. That's not our job. Our job is to connect with sports fans as brands. And the tightrope between the two is where we come in.
Yeah, obviously I wouldn't expect you to name names, but do you find at all when you're doing the work you do you find that the clients, when you ask that question, is the answer a bit unclear because they're not always so sure themselves as to the answer to that? You'd think they would be, but yeah. I wonder whether they kind of come up with what might be some, I don't know, Harvard gobbledygook. Is that something you come across?
It's a really good question, actually, Phil. And it's probably the most varied part of our job. You know, when I talked earlier about the execution I could probably lump into 6 or 7 commodities, products, right? Hosting, media relations, etc. The input is hugely varied. And without any question, the most successful projects we've delivered in 14 years have been the projects which have been briefed.
Sorry.
Okay.
There's a alarm. Sorry, I can edit this out.
Is that your
alarm? Car? It's not my car, fortunately, but okay, stop now. Sorry, you were in full flow.
I can't remember. Is this all right so far? I mean,
oh, brilliant! Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's great.
Question again. I can't remember what the question was now.
I have no idea.
Oh,
no, I'll start it again from the top. Yeah,
sure.
Do you find that when you're talking to clients, when you ask them the questions about what they do and who they're trying to sell to and who their target market is and what they're trying to achieve, do you find the answers are clear and concise, or is it almost like you've thrown them a curveball by asking the question?
I think that in itself is probably the most important question of any project. The most successful stuff we've done has unquestionably been delivered against a super clear brief. Help me increase my sales by X%. Well, you've kind of answered your own question, right? You've told me my indicator for success, and therefore you'll measure me against how many more of these things you sell. It is, however, not always as simple as that. I don't think you ever want to be the problem. Nobody wants to ask a difficult question. So certainly we sit with clients and help them understand their targets, but it's not always clear. Absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I guess I feel sometimes for CEOs in this modern world that we live in, because of the sheer pace of change, you know, the product cycle. You know, they can have a new product that they can start to sell and gets copied very, very quickly, and suddenly, maybe a year or 2 years later, they're having to change it again or come up with something new or different, which I think in the past would have been a lot longer.
It certainly would, and yet sponsorship within the marketing mix is probably the most malleable string in the bow, because we can change super quickly. We can change how we execute. We can change what we talk about. And I don't just mean physically, you know, track and pitch side branding. I mean, we've got an enormous amount of control. Once you've committed to an ad campaign, you've spent your ad budget for the 2 years on a product, and the product bombs or whatever happens to be, it's much harder. So I think sponsorship sometimes undersells its usefulness, if I'm honest. But I do sympathize with people who put the vast majority of their budget into trusted marketing channels. But if you're looking for a channel that can accommodate change, there are a few, probably digital's got to be close because of the frequency, that will be able to deliver as constantly and as varied as sponsorship.
Interesting stuff. Right, Peter. Well, we'll call it a day there, because I think we've covered some really interesting things there. So thanks for sharing your passions, and I just hope you're happy on Sunday night at the end of the game. I guess that's the best way I can put it, really.
So do I. I have no idea.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for joining me today on Passions. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing those insights. It's been really, really useful, and I've certainly enjoyed it, and it's certainly given me more understanding of the whole area of sponsorship, and particular in the area of obviously of motorsport. So thank you.
Cheers, Phil. Take care.